That Thanksgiving night, I sat at the family table feeling like forgiveness was finally on the menu. Instead, my brother received $300,000 cash, and I received a check requiring me to repay my own parents. As I stood up and walked out to the sound of their laughter, they had no idea they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to burn their entire plan to the ground. My name is Riley Simpson, and for the last 5 years, I had convinced myself that distance was the only currency my family understood. I lived 3 hours away, in a condo I bought with my own money, working a job at Hawthorne and Slate Compliance Group, where I spent my days hunting down regulatory risks and financial discrepancies. I was good at spotting rot in corporate structures. Yet somehow, I had allowed myself to be blind to the rot in my own bloodline. The invitation to Thanksgiving had arrived via a heavy, cream-colored cardstock envelope, addressed in my mother's impeccable, looping calligraphy. It was not a text message or a phone call. It was a summons disguised as an olive branch. Family reunion, it had said. Time to heal. I pulled my car into the circular driveway of the estate in Briar Glen, Ohio. The house loomed against the gray November sky, a sprawling brick mansion that looked more like a municipal building than a home. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life, the hedges trimmed into sharp, geometric submission. My stomach tightened, a familiar knot of anxiety that I thought I had outgrown in my 30s. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked sharp, professional. I was 34 years old, wearing a blazer that cost 2 weeks of my salary and boots that clicked with authority. I was not the scared little girl who ran away from their expectations anymore. Or so I told myself. When I walked through the double oak doors, the warmth hit me first. It was a physical wall of heat, scented with roasted sage, cinnamon, and the expensive, cloying perfume my mother, Eleanor, had worn since the 90s. The foyer was crowded. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in years were milling about, holding crystal tumblers of scotch and wine. "Riley!" The voice was high, pitched to convey delight but vibrating with an undertone of performance. My mother descended the grand staircase, her arms outstretched. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered like spilled oil. She hugged me, and her body felt stiff, her pat on my back rhythmic and hollow. "I am so glad you decided to be sensible and come home," she whispered in my ear. The word sensible felt like a small scratch, a warning shot. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," I said, pulling away to look her in the eye. "It is a happy one," she declared, turning to the room. "The whole flock is together." My father, Richard, stood by the fireplace, swirling his drink. He nodded at me, a gesture that conveyed acknowledgement but not welcome. Standing next to him was my brother, Logan. Logan was 2 years older than me, the golden boy who had never left Briar Glen, the one who had stayed to manage the family investments, which mostly seemed to involve playing golf and buying cars he couldn't afford. "Hey, little sister," Logan grinned, raising his glass. "Long time. You look corporate." "I work for a living, Logan," I said, keeping my voice light. "You should try it sometime." He laughed, a loud barking sound that made a few cousins turn and smile. "Feisty. I missed that." The dinner was an elaborate production. We sat at the long mahogany table that could seat 20. The china was bone white with gold rims, the silverware heavy enough to be weapons. I was seated between a deaf great-aunt and a man I didn't recognize, a heavy-set guy with gray hair and a suit that looked tailored in Europe. He didn't introduce himself, and when I asked my mother who he was later, she just waved her hand and said, "A friend of the family, a consultant." Throughout the meal, the conversation was carefully curated. No one mentioned why I had left. No one mentioned the screaming matches of 5 years ago. They talked about real estate prices, the new country club renovations, and the weather. It was pleasant. It was terrifying. It felt like the calm surface of a lake concealing a bed of jagged rocks. When the pumpkin pie was cleared away, my father stood up. He tapped a silver spoon against his wine glass. The sharp ting-ting-ting silenced the room immediately. "If I could have everyone's attention," my father boomed, His face was flushed, his eyes bright with the influence of the 3 glasses of vintage Cabernet he had consumed. "This Thanksgiving is special. It is about legacy. It is about ensuring the Simpson name continues to thrive." My mother stood up beside him, clasping her hands together. She looked at Logan, her eyes shining with tears that I knew she could summon on command. "We have decided," my father continued, "that it is time to reward those who have stayed true to this family, those who have put the family first." He reached under the table and pulled out a sleek black leather briefcase. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward Logan. "Logan, son, for your dedication to the business and to help with the expansion you have been planning, we want you to have this." Logan stood up, feigning shock. He opened the briefcase. Even from where I sat, I could see the stacks of currency. It was cash, a vulgar, theatrical display of cash. "Dad, Mom, this is—" Logan stammered, looking around the room to ensure everyone was watching his humility. $300,000, my father announced, his voice swelling with pride. "Seed money, for the future." The table erupted in applause. My aunts cooed. My cousins looked jealous. Logan wiped a fake tear from his eye and went to hug our parents. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest. $300,000. That was more than the down payment on my condo. That was a life-changing amount of money, handed over like a dinner mint. Then, the room went quiet again. My mother turned her gaze toward me. The warmth was gone from her eyes, replaced by a steely, calculating look I knew well. "And Riley," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "we have not forgotten you." She picked up a thin, cream-colored envelope from the table. It was not a briefcase. It was barely the thickness of a greeting card. She walked over to where I sat and placed it on the placemat in front of me. "Open it," Logan urged, back in his seat, the briefcase sitting open next to him like a trophy. "It's important, Rye." I picked up the envelope. My fingers felt numb. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper and a check. I pulled out the check first. My eyes scanned the lines, my compliance training kicking in automatically. It was a personal check, drawn from a bank account I recognized, a joint custodial account from when I was a teenager, one I thought had been closed years ago. The check was made out to the Simpson Family Trust. The amount field was filled in, $75,000. And on the signature line at the bottom right, it was blank. I frowned, confusion warring with the rising bile in my throat. I looked at the letter accompanying it. It was a single sheet of stationery with my father's letterhead. To Riley Simpson. Subject: Repayment of family obligations. This document serves as an acknowledgement of debt incurred during your upbringing, education, and the unapproved departure from the family home which caused significant emotional and reputation distress. By signing the attached check, you agree to transfer the remaining balance of your grandmother's educational trust back to the Simpson Family General Fund to cover these costs. Consider this your path to redemption. I read it twice. The words swam before my eyes. Repayment, upbringing, reputation distress. "What is this?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence of the room. "It is an opportunity," my father said, sitting back down. He looked smug. "You left, Riley. You abandoned your duties. You have been living your independent life, thinking you owe us nothing. But we invested in you. We raised you. And since you are not contributing to the family business like Logan, it is only fair you pay back your share." "You want me to sign a check, giving you $75,000? I looked at him, incredulous. "From the trust Grandma left me? The trust that I legally access when I turn 35 next year?" "It is family money," my mother said sharply. "It belongs in the family pot. Logan needs capital. You have a job. You are fine." "So you gave him $300,000, I said, pointing at my brother. "And you gave me a bill?" "A bill for your freedom," Logan interjected, leaning forward. His voice was smooth, patronizing. "Come on, Riley. Just sign it. Keep the peace. Mom and Dad are really hurt by how you've been acting. This settles the score. We can be a happy family again. Just put your signature on the line, and everything is forgiven." I looked around the table. The aunts and uncles were looking at their plates or sipping their wine, studiously ignoring the extortion happening in plain sight. The gray-haired consultant was watching me intently. His eyes narrowed, studying my reaction like a hawk. I looked down at the check again. A normal person might have just seen a demand for money, but I looked at documents for a living. I saw the formatting. I saw the date. Post-dated for tomorrow. I saw the memo line which read, "Voluntary restitution." If I signed this, I wasn't just giving them money. I was legally admitting that I owed them. I was creating a paper trail that validated a debt that did not exist. If I signed this, they could come back for more. This wasn't a settlement. It was an admission of liability. It was a trap, a legal bear trap painted to look like a family obligation. "You calculated this," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I tried to suppress. "You invited me here, put on this show, gave Logan a fortune, and then tried to publicly shame me into signing over my inheritance." "Don't be dramatic," my mother snapped. "It is a standard arrangement." "There is nothing standard about billing your daughter for raising her," I said. "You are ungrateful," my father spat, his face turning a darker shade of red. "We gave you everything, and you walked away. You owe us." "Just sign the check, Riley," Logan said, his voice losing its friendly veneer. "Don't ruin Thanksgiving." I looked at the pen my mother had helpfully placed next to the envelope, a heavy gold Mont Blanc. It was tempting to pick it up and throw it into the fireplace, but that is what the old Riley would have done. The emotional Riley. The Riley who worked at Hawthorne and Slate took a breath. I looked at the check one last time. I memorized the routing number. I memorized the account number. I memorized the specific wording on the letter. Then, I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" My father looked like he had been slapped. I said no. I placed the check back into the envelope. I placed the envelope precisely in the center of my placemat. "I am not signing this, and I am not paying you for the privilege of being your daughter." "If you walk out that door," my father shouted, standing up and slamming his hand on the table, making the silverware jump, "do not expect to come back. You are cutting yourself off, Riley, for good." "I think you did that for me," I said. I grabbed my purse. I turned my back on the turkey, the wine, the $300,000 on the table, and the people who shared my DNA. As I walked toward the archway leading to the foyer, I heard Logan snort. "Let her go," he laughed, loud enough for me to hear. "She'll come crawling back when she realizes she has nothing. She's always been weak." My mother laughed too, a high, nervous titter that joined in with the cousins' chuckles. They were laughing at me. They thought I was fleeing in humiliation. They thought they had won by shaming me, and that eventually, the guilt would make me mail that signed check back to them. I walked out the front door into the biting November cold. The wind hit my face, drying the tears I hadn't realized were forming in my eyes. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. My hands were trembling as I gripped the steering wheel, but not from sadness. I was trembling with adrenaline. They thought the check was the weapon. They thought the signature was the lock. But as I looked back at the house, glowing warm and golden in the night, I realized something they didn't. By handing me that envelope, by showing me the structure of the trust they were trying to drain, and by letting me see the face of the consultant sitting at their table, they had given me something far more valuable than $300,000. They had given me the first thread of a sweater I was going to unravel until they were all naked in the cold. I started the engine, shifted into reverse, and drove away from the laughter. I drove 3 hours back to my condo in silence, the radio off. The only sound, the hum of tires on the interstate and the racing of my own mind. When I finally walked through my front door, I didn't crash onto the couch or pour myself a drink. Even though my hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, I went straight to my home office, a converted second bedroom that was sterile, organized, and safe. the exact opposite of the house I had just fled. I reached into my purse and pulled out the crumpled cream envelope. In the heat of the moment at the dinner table, I had placed it down, intending to leave it as a statement. But as my father had slammed his hand on the table and Logan had started laughing, a survival instinct I hadn't used since I was 18 kicked in. In the split second before I turned my back, I had snatched the envelope off the placemat. They were too busy gloating to notice. I needed to know what I was up against, and I couldn't analyze a memory. I needed the physical evidence. I smoothed the document out on my desk under the harsh glare of my halogen lamp. The check for $75,000 lay there, innocent and deadly. I pulled out my jeweler's loupe, a tool I used for inspecting physical securities in my line of work, and leaned in. The paper stock was high quality, linen woven, but it wasn't a standard personal check from the family's main checking account. I examined the MyCR line at the bottom, the string of numbers that tells the banking system where the money lives. The routing number was standard for the regional bank my parents used, but the account number was unfamiliar. It ended in a specific 4-digit sequence that didn't match the checking account my mother used for groceries or the business account Logan bragged about. I logged into a proprietary database I had access to through my credentials at Hawthorne and Slate. It was strictly for work purposes, but tonight I was the client. I ran a query on the account structure associated with that specific bank's trust division. The result popped up on my screen, glowing green against the black background. Simpson Family Irrevocable Trust, Series B. I frowned. Series B? I knew about the Series A trust. That was the general fund my grandfather had set up. Series B was something I had never heard of. I dug deeper into the metadata of the check's serialization. This wasn't just a withdrawal slip. The check had a transaction code embedded in the reference line. T99, release. I sat back, my heart hammering against my ribs. In banking compliance, specific transaction codes are used to trigger automatic contract clauses upon clearing. If I deposited this check, or even if I signed it and gave it back to them to deposit, the bank's system would recognize that code. I picked up my phone and called a contact of mine, a fraud analyst at the issuing bank who owed me a favor from a case we worked on last year. It was late on Thanksgiving, but I knew he would be up gaming. "David," I said when he answered, "hypothetically, if I have a check with a T99 release code on the memo line, issued from an irrevocable trust to a beneficiary, what does that execute?" There was a pause, the sound of a keyboard clacking. "Happy Thanksgiving to you too. Riley, you are working? That is tragic." "Just tell me, David." "Okay," he said, his voice dropping. "That is a legacy code. We hardly use it anymore. It stands for Total Beneficiary Release. Basically, it is a settlement instrument. If the beneficiary endorses the check, they are legally confirming receipt of their full and final share of the trust assets. It automatically waives any future claims to the principal balance. Why? Who gave you that?" "Nobody," I said, my voice cold. "Just a hypothetical." I hung up. The room felt suddenly freezing. They weren't just trying to get $75,000 out of me. That was a decoy. The real play was the waiver. By signing that check to pay them back, I would be inadvertently triggering the T99 code. The system would record that I had accepted a settlement. I would be effectively signing away my rights to whatever was actually in that Series B trust, which I suspected was worth a lot more than $75,000. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating so hard it startled me. A text message from my mother. "You have made a grave mistake tonight. Riley, we offered you a way to be clean. Since you chose to run, our family attorney will be contacting you regarding the debt collection. Do not think you can ignore this." I stared at the screen. Debt collection. It was a bluff, but a sophisticated one. They were trying to scare me into signing the check to avoid a lawsuit, not realizing, or perhaps realizing perfectly well, that signing it was the real suicide. I looked at the letter again, the one demanding voluntary restitution. The phrasing was peculiar. It was overly formal, stilted, using words like obligation and redemption mixed with strict liability terms. It read less like a letter from a father and more like a coercion agreement drafted by a lawyer who wanted to skirt the edges of legality. Coercion. The word triggered a memory so sharp it almost brought me to my knees. I was 22, sitting in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fading lilies. My grandmother, Evelyn Simpson, was holding my hand. Her grip was weak, her skin like parchment paper, but her eyes were lucid. "They will try to take it. Riley," she had whispered. "Your father and that brother of yours. They see money as scorekeeping, but I left a fail-safe." "What fail-safe, Grandma?" I had asked, thinking she was delirious from the medication. "The sewing box," she had wheezed. "The blue tin. Never let them throw it away. Look under the velvet." I hadn't thought about that box in years. When she died, I had taken a few small keepsakes, including the battered blue cookie tin she kept her needles and thread in. My mother had sneered at it, calling it junk, which was exactly why I kept it. I scrambled up from my chair and ran to the hallway closet. I tore through boxes of winter coats and old tax returns until I found it on the top shelf, pushed back behind a broken humidifier. I pulled the tin down. It was rusted at the edges. The picture of the Danish butter cookies faded. I carried it back to my desk and popped the lid. Inside, it was a mess of tangled threads, rusty safety pins, and a tomato-shaped pincushion. "Look under the velvet." I dumped the contents onto my desk. The bottom of the tin was lined with a dark blue velvet pad, glued to the metal, or so it seemed. I took a letter opener and jammed it into the corner, prying upward. The velvet lining popped up with a metallic snick. It was a false bottom. Underneath, resting against the cold metal, was a silver USB drive, old tech, bulky and thick, and a folded piece of yellow legal paper. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper. It was Grandma Evelyn's handwriting, spidery but firm. "My darling Riley, if you are reading this, then my son, your father, has lost his way. I have set up the Simpson Legacy Trust 2, Series B, specifically for my grandchildren. However, I know Richard. He will want to control it. He will try to merge it into his own accounts. I have instructed the original trustees to include a duress clause in the founding charter. It is a poison pill. If any beneficiary is coerced, threatened, or manipulated into signing away their rights to this trust, or if the distribution is not equal among the heirs, the trust does not revert to the family general fund. Instead, it freezes immediately and triggers an external audit. Use the evidence on the drive. It contains the original charter I signed. Do not let them bully you. You are stronger than them. Love, Grandma." I picked up the USB drive. I didn't plug it in yet. I needed to air-gap my computer first to be safe, but I didn't need to see the files to understand what had just happened. My parents and Logan, in their greed, had handed me the very thing I needed to activate Grandma's poison pill. The check they gave me wasn't just a trap for me, it was proof of their attempt to bypass the trust's rules. By threatening me with a lawyer via text message to force me to sign a document that contained the T99 release code, they had legally fulfilled the definition of coercion outlined in Grandma's letter. I looked at the check again. A moment ago, it had been a terrifying demand for money I didn't have. Now, it looked different. It looked like a key. They thought they were stripping me of my inheritance, but they had just handed me the detonator to their own fortune. I picked up my phone and took a screenshot of my mother's threatening text. Then I placed the check, the letter, and the USB drive together in a neat pile. "Okay, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "You want a lawyer? You are going to wish you had never mentioned the word." I wasn't going to sign the check, but I wasn't going to tear it up either. I was going to frame it, because this piece of paper was about to become the most expensive mistake the Simpson family had ever made. The text message arrived on Monday morning, just as I was settling into my desk at Hawthorne and Slate. The office was humming with the low-level anxiety of the start of the week. Phones ringing and keyboards clacking. I was trying to focus on a risk assessment file for a pharmaceutical client, but my mind was still stuck in the rusted blue tin box I had unearthed on Thursday night. "Logan, I'm in town. 5 minutes from your office. Meet me at the grind in 20. Just us. No parents. Please. Rye. I stared at the screen. My brother never came to my city. To him, anything outside the Briar Glen zip code was a wasteland of irrelevance. For him to drive 3 hours on a Monday morning meant the situation back at the manor had escalated. Or more likely, he had been deployed as the tactical unit to clean up the mess. I considered ignoring him, but in my line of work, you never refuse an opportunity to gather intelligence on a hostile party. And make no mistake, my brother was now a hostile party. I grabbed my coat and my phone. Before I slid the phone into my pocket, I opened the voice memo app. I tapped the red record button and set the phone screen down on the table when I arrived. The Grind was an industrial chic coffee shop where junior analysts and burnt-out lawyers came to inject caffeine into their veins. Logan was sitting at a corner table, looking wildly out of place. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the barista's car, and his hair was gelled into a perfect, stiff wave. He looked like a catalog model for leisurely wealth, while everyone else around him looked like they were running a marathon. When he saw me, he stood up, flashing that dazzling, practiced smile that used to charm my high school friends. "Rye," he said, reaching out to hug me. I sidestepped him and sat down. "I have 30 minutes. Logan, I have a job to get back to." He laughed, a nervous, airless sound, and sat back down. He wrapped his hands around a black coffee. "Always the worker bee. You know, Mom and Dad are really worried about you. Dad's blood pressure spiked after you left on Thursday. Mom's been crying all weekend. If they sent you here to guilt-trip me, you can drive the 3 hours back right now," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I am not signing that check. Logan?" Logan sighed, leaning forward, his face shifting into an expression of deep, brotherly concern. It was a look I used to believe. Now, I just saw the muscles tightening around his jaw. "Look, Riley, I get it. You felt ambushed. They have a terrible way of communicating, but you are blowing this out of proportion. It's just a formality, an accounting thing." "An accounting thing," I repeated. "Charging your daughter $75,000 for raising her is accounting?" "It's not for raising you," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's about balancing the books. The family assets are being restructured. We are trying to consolidate everything so we can make some big moves. Dad just wants everyone to be on the same page. If you sign the check, it just clears the ledger. It shows you are part of the team." "And the $300,000 you got? Was that for the team too?" Logan's eyes flickered. "That is business capital. Investments. It is different." "What kind of business? Logan?" I asked. "You said you were expanding. Expanding what? You haven't actually run a project in 2 years." He bristled, his ego pricked. "I have plenty going on. I am moving into commercial real estate development. High-end mixed-use stuff. It is huge. Rye, we are talking about doubling the family net worth in 5 years. But we need liquidity. We need the trust structures to be clean." I watched him carefully. He was tapping his fingers on the table, a tell he had since he was 12. He was lying, or at least omitting the massive, jagged truth. "The trust structures," I said slowly. "You mean the general fund?" "Yeah, the general fund," he said quickly. "And the subsidiary trusts, like the Series B. We need to consolidate the Series B assets to leverage the loans for the new property." I froze. My breath caught in my throat, but I forced my face to remain impassive. Series B. I had never mentioned the Series B trust to him. On Thursday night, the check I received was drawn from a custodial account, but the letter had only referenced the Simpson Family Trust generically. The specific name, Simpson Legacy Trust 2, Series B, was only on the digital banking metadata I had uncovered on my own computer, and in the secret letter from Grandma inside the sewing tin. To my parents and Logan, I was just supposed to see a check and a demand. I wasn't supposed to know the specific vehicle they were trying to drain. "Series B?" I asked, feigning confusion. "I thought this was about Grandma's education fund. Is that what it's called?" Logan froze. He realized his mistake instantly. His eyes darted to the left, then back to me. He took a long sip of coffee to buy time. It is, yeah, that is the technical name for it. The point is, Riley, the lawyers are being a pain. They won't let us move forward with the development deal until all the beneficiary lines are cleared up. Your signature is the only thing holding up the whole project, holding up my future. So you do know, I said softly. You aren't just the lucky recipient of a cash gift. You are in on the restructuring. I am the heir. Riley, he snapped, his voice rising enough to make the woman at the next table look up. Of course I am involved. Dad is getting old. Someone has to steer the ship, and it sure as hell isn't going to be you, hiding out here in your little condo pretending to be a corporate drone. The mask was off. The concerned brother was gone, replaced by the entitled, desperate man who needed my signature to unlock his payday. I am not hiding, I said. I am working, and I am not signing a document that frames a theft as a debt repayment. It is not theft, he hissed, leaning over the table. It is family money. It belongs to the people who actually care about the name. Grandma didn't know what she was doing when she set those terms. She was old. She was confused. She seemed pretty clear to me, I said. Clear enough to know you would try this. Logan sat back, crossing his arms. A nasty, superior smile played on his lips. You think you are so smart, don't you? With your compliance job and your little law degree. But you don't understand how the real world works. We have leverage, Riley. You have nothing, I said. You have a check I didn't sign. We have your reputation, he said. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stared at him. Excuse me? Hawthorne and Slate, he said, looking around the coffee shop as if he owned it. Prestigious firm, very big on ethics, very big on financial integrity. Imagine if they found out that their star compliance officer was being sued by her own family for fraud. Imagine if a lawsuit was filed claiming you embezzled funds from a family trust years ago, and we were just trying to settle it quietly? My stomach turned over. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. But in the world of high-stakes corporate compliance, the mere accusation could trigger an internal investigation. It could get me suspended. It would humiliate me. You wouldn't, I said. I wouldn't want to. Logan shrugged, picking an imaginary piece of lint off his cashmere sleeve. But Dad is furious. He is ready to file the papers tomorrow. Unless, of course, you sign the check. Then it all goes away. No lawsuit, no scandal. You keep your job. I get my project, and we all have a Merry Christmas. I looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in years, I saw the desperation behind the arrogance. He wasn't just greedy. He was cornered. They needed that Series B money desperately. The $300,000 he received was probably just the bait, or maybe an advance from a loan shark, and they needed my trust fund to cover the real debts. You are blackmailing me, I stated. I am negotiating, he corrected. This is how business is done. Riley, grow up. I glanced down at my phone, still face down on the table, the red light of the recording app invisible against the dark wood, but the microphone capturing every syllable of his extortion. What is the project, Logan? I asked, shifting the subject to keep him talking. If I'm going to sign my inheritance away, I want to know what I am buying. It is a resort, he said, his ego taking the bait immediately. Near the lake, luxury cabins, a clubhouse. We are buying the land through a holding company. It is going to be the premier destination in the county. We have a consultant helping us structure the acquisition, a genius guy. He says the returns will be triple within 18 months. The man at dinner? I asked. The gray-haired man? Yeah, Mr. Sterling. Well, that's not his real name. He goes by a few for privacy, but he is top tier. He set up the whole LLC for us. Mr. Sterling, or Mr. Gray, as I had mentally dubbed him, and Logan had just admitted they were buying land through a shell company using trust funds. And you need my $75,000 for a resort? I asked skeptically. It is not about the 75, Logan sneered. It is about the release. The Series B has Other assets attached to it, real estate assets. Grandma put the deed to the old lake house in that trust. Riley, we can't develop the land if the deed is tied up in a trust with your name on it as a beneficiary. We need the release code to break the trust and transfer the deed to the LLC. There it was, the smoking gun. It wasn't about the cash in the account. It was about the land. The land Grandma had loved. They were going to bulldoze her legacy to build cheap luxury cabins, and they needed me to sign away my rights to stop them. I see, I said. I reached for my purse. Thank you for clarifying. Logan? So you'll sign? He asked, hopeful. I'll think about it, I lied. Don't think too long, he warned, his voice hardening again. Dad is drafting the lawsuit this afternoon. You have until Wednesday. After that, we go nuclear. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. I walked out of the coffee shop, my heart pounding in my ears. I walked a block away, turned a corner, and leaned against the brick wall of an alleyway. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. Saved. New memo 4. I pressed play and held it to my ear. It is a poison pill. If any beneficiary is coerced, threatened, or manipulated. I replayed Logan's voice. Imagine if they found out that their star compliance officer was being sued. We have leverage. The Series B has real estate assets. He had just handed me everything. He had confirmed the existence of the Series B trust. He had confirmed the intent to defraud me of real estate assets. He had confirmed the blackmail regarding my employment. I wasn't just a disgruntled daughter anymore. I was now a witness with a tape. Logan thought he had intimidated me. He thought he had played the heavy hand perfectly. But as I walked back toward the glass doors of Hawthorne and Slate, I wasn't afraid of his lawsuit. I was already drafting the affidavit in my head. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a conspiracy to commit fraud. And my brother had just cast himself as the lead villain. The red recording light on my phone had been extinguished. But the voice of my brother saying, "We have leverage," was still echoing in my head as I sat before my laptop later that evening. I had extracted the audio file, saved it to 3 different cloud servers, and encrypted it. That was the easy part. The hard part was sitting on my desk, glowing faintly in the light of my monitor. The silver USB drive from the rusted sewing tin. I had prepared an air-gapped laptop, an old machine I kept for testing malware at work, completely disconnected from the internet. I couldn't risk whatever was on this drive phoning home. Nor could I risk any spyware my family might have deployed sensing the connection. It sounded paranoid, but after this morning, paranoia was just another word for preparedness. I plugged the drive in. The computer chimed, a cheerful sound that felt jarring in the silence of my apartment. The file directory popped up. It was organized with a precision that made my chest ache. My grandmother, Evelyn, had been a woman of lists and labels. There were folders named Deeds, Tax Returns, 1990-2010, and one simply labeled The Failsafe. I opened the failsafe first. Inside was a text file containing a username and a complex password, along with a scanned PDF of the original trust charter for the Simpson Legacy Trust 2, Series B. But it was the third file that caught my attention. It was a digital ledger, an Excel spreadsheet that Grandma had apparently updated manually until the month she died. I opened the trust charter on one screen and the ledger on another. Then, using my primary, internet-connected work laptop, I navigated to the online portal for the bank that held the trust. Using the credentials from the text file, praying they hadn't been changed in 4 years, I typed them in. Access granted. My breath hissed out between my teeth. My parents were creatures of habit, technologically illiterate and arrogant. They had likely never bothered to reset the administrative passwords because they assumed they had physical control over the paperwork. They didn't know Grandma had a digital backdoor. I was looking at the live, beating heart of the Series B trust. And it was bleeding. I placed Grandma's old spreadsheet next to the live transaction history. When Grandma died, the trust had held liquid assets of nearly $2 million, plus the deed to the lakeside property. Today, the liquid balance was hovering just above $400,000. I began to trace the hemorrhage. It wasn't a sudden theft. It was a slow, methodical draining. Starting 18 months ago, there was a recurring debit. Consulting retainer, Omni Strategy Partners, LLC. $5,000 a month, then $10,000, then $15,000. I cross-referenced the dates. The increases in these fees coincided perfectly with moments I knew my father had been stressed about money, times when he had sold a classic car or complained about the club dues. But then I saw the big one. Dated 3 days ago, November 24th, 2 days before Thanksgiving. Withdrawal. Business capital investment. Payee. Omni Strategy. Partners, LLC. Amount, $300,000. I sat back, the cold light of the screen washing over my face. $300,000. The exact amount of cash my father had slapped onto the table in that leather briefcase for Logan. My father hadn't given Logan his own money. He hadn't even given Logan the family's money. He had withdrawn $300,000 from the trust, my trust, and Logan's trust, laundered it through this Omni Strategy Partners, and then withdrawn it as cash to present it as a gift. It was a shell game. They were looting the principal to pretend they were still rich. But why pay it to an LLC first? Why not just withdraw it directly to Logan? I opened a new tab and pulled up the Secretary of State's Business Registry database. I typed in Omni Strategy Partners, LLC. The search returned a hit immediately. The company was registered in Delaware, a haven for corporate anonymity, but the registered agent had a correspondence address in Columbus, Ohio. It was a sterile office park address, likely a virtual mailbox. I dug deeper. I pulled the articles of incorporation. The managing member wasn't my father. It wasn't Logan. It was a name I didn't recognize at first. Julian G. Sterling. Sterling. The name Logan had dropped at the coffee shop. Mr. Sterling, a genius guy. My mind flashed back to the Thanksgiving dinner. The heavy-set man with the gray hair and the European suit. The one who hadn't introduced himself. The one who had sat silently while my father gave his speech, sipping his wine with a look of bored detachment. He wasn't a family friend. He wasn't a distant relative. I closed my eyes and replayed the dinner scene. I remembered how he watched my father. It wasn't the look of a subordinate looking at a boss. It was the look of a puppeteer checking the strings. When my father had handed Logan the money, this man hadn't clapped. He had smirked, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch of the lips. I looked back at the transaction history. Consulting retainer, legal advisory fee, project management surcharge. This man, this Sterling, had been billing the trust for nearly 2 years. He had drained over $500,000 in fees before they even got to the $300,000 withdrawal. I started searching for Julian Sterling on the open web. No LinkedIn profile, no Facebook, no company website for Omni Strategy Partners. He was a ghost. But in my line of work, nobody is truly a ghost. If you move money, you leave a footprint. I switched to a specialized database used for tracking high-risk financial actors. It was a gray area tool, expensive and strictly for industry professionals. I entered Julian Sterling combined with Ohio and real estate. A court docket from 5 years ago popped up, a civil suit in Cleveland, estate of Margaret Vane versus Sterling Asset Management. I read the summary. An elderly widow had been convinced to liquidate her assets into a development fund managed by Sterling. The fund went bust. The land was seized by the creditors, which turned out to be another company owned by Sterling, and the widow was left with nothing. The case was settled out of court, sealed. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of my apartment. My parents weren't the villains I thought they were. They were the victims who thought they were accomplices. This man, this Mr. Gray, as I had called him in my head, had found them. He had smelled their desperation, their need to maintain the appearance of wealth in a declining economy. He had pitched them a dream, a luxury resort, a way to double their net worth. All they had to do was trust him. All they had to do was unlock the dead capital sitting in Grandma's trust. He was feeding Logan's ego with the developer title. He was feeding my father's pride with the legacy talk. And in exchange, he was systematically stripping the copper wiring out of the Simpson family walls. The $300,000 cash given to Logan wasn't a gift, it was bait. It was likely money that Sterling had cycled back to them to make them feel flush, to make them feel like the project was real. So they would be emboldened to go after the big prize, the land deed held in the Series B trust. That was why they needed my signature on the check. That was why they needed the T-99 release code. Sterling couldn't touch the land as long as the trust was intact. He needed the beneficiaries to voluntarily dissolve their interest. He needed me out of the way. My father and Logan were doing the dirty work, the bullying, the blackmailing, the shouting, while Sterling sat back and collected his 5%, 10%, 15% consulting fee on every move they made. I looked at the screen, at the list of withdrawals that represented my grandmother's life's work. If I hadn't walked out, if I had signed that check, Sterling would have had the deed by Monday morning. He would have leveraged the land for a massive loan, defaulted on it, and walked away with the cash, leaving my family with the debt and the dirt. My anger shifted. It cooled and hardened into something sharp and precise. I wasn't just mad at my family anymore. In a twisted way, I almost pitied them. They were sheep walking into a slaughterhouse, convinced they were the butchers. But that pity didn't mean I was going to save them. Not yet. I needed to know more about Mr. Gray. I needed to know how deep his hooks were, and most importantly, I needed to know what legal structure he had set up for this resort. I went back to the Secretary of State search. I looked up Omni Strategy Partners again. I pulled the annual report. There, listed as the authorized signer for the LLC, wasn't Sterling. He was too smart for that. It was Richard Simpson, my father. My father was the signer on the shell company that was billing his own family trust. Sterling had set it up so that on paper, my father was stealing from himself. If this blew up, if the IRS came calling, or if the fraud was exposed, Sterling's name wouldn't be on the indictment. My father's name would be. Sterling had built a perfect trap. He was the consultant, the advisor, the ghost. My father was the face, the signature, the fall guy. I sat back in my chair and let out a long, shaky breath. "You idiots," I whispered into the darkness. "You absolute arrogant idiots." They were threatening to sue me? They were threatening to ruin my reputation? They were standing on a trapdoor with a noose around their necks, and they were handing the lever to the executioner. I looked at the USB drive again. Grandma had warned me about my father's greed. She hadn't warned me about his stupidity. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Logan. I didn't call my parents. Instead, I opened my calendar. I needed to schedule a meeting, not with them, but with a forensic accountant I knew in Chicago, someone who could certify these findings. Because when I finally dropped the hammer, I wasn't just going to break a family squabble. I was going to take down a professional predator. And to do that, I had to let them think they were winning for just a little bit longer. I had to let Mr. Gray get confident. I had to let him think the difficult daughter was breaking. I closed the laptop, the glow fading into black. The game had just changed. It wasn't checkers anymore. It was chess, and I was the only one who could see the whole board. I let the deadline hang in the air like smoke. Wednesday came and went. I went to work. I answered emails, and I let my phone buzz on my desk, ignoring the escalating franticness of Logan's text messages. By Thursday morning, they had moved from threats to bargaining. "We can work out a payment plan." Logan texted at 9 o'clock. "Mom is really sick over this." He texted at noon. "Just answer the phone." "Riley," came the message at 3 o'clock. In negotiation theory, this is called the flinch. They were nervous. They had played their ace, the threat to my job, and I hadn't folded immediately. That meant they were recalculating, but I couldn't let them recalculate too long, or they might try something desperate, like actually filing that lawsuit or forging my signature. I needed them to believe that their initial strategy had worked, just with a delay. At 4 o'clock on Thursday, I sent a single text message to Logan. I kept it lowercase, devoid of punctuation, mimicking the exhaustion of someone who had been crying for 3 days. "I can't lose my job, Logan. Tell me where to sign. Just make it stop." The response was immediate. It didn't take 5 minutes. It took 30 seconds. The bubbles appeared, vanished, and appeared again. "Good choice. Rye, you are doing the right thing. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, Henderson's office. We will have everything ready." Henderson was the family attorney, a man who had been handling my father's parking tickets and real estate closings since the 80s. He was competent enough to draft a will, but he was out of his depth with complex trust law. That was good for me. "Okay," I whispered to my office walls. "You have your meeting." But before I walked into Henderson's office, I needed to know exactly where the money was going. I had the who, Sterling and his shell company. I had the how, the fake consulting fees, but I needed the where. I left work early and drove to a nondescript office building in downtown Columbus to meet Marcus. Marcus was a forensic accountant I had worked with on a messy embezzlement case 2 years ago. He was expensive, he was discreet, and he could find a needle in a haystack made of needles. I had sent him the encrypted files from Grandma's USB drive and the data I had scraped from the Secretary of State earlier that week. When I walked into his conference room, Marcus was standing by a whiteboard, looking at a printed map of the Briar Glen area. "You were right about the churning," Marcus said without preamble. He tapped a spreadsheet on the table. "This Omni Strategy Partners LLC is a classic pass-through entity. Money comes in from the trust, sits for 24 hours, and goes out. It is layering. Basic money laundering structure, but effective if nobody is looking." "Where is it going, Marcus?" I asked, sitting down. "Logan said they are buying land for a resort." "They are buying land," Marcus confirmed. "But it is not for a resort, at least, not a commercial one." He slid a stack of documents toward me. "I traced the wire transfer for the $300,000 your brother received. It didn't stay in his account. He endorsed the cash withdrawal. But the corresponding entry on the LLC side shows a purchase order to a title company in Florida." "Florida?" I frowned. "Logan said the project was near the lake." "The LLC bought a property near the lake 6 months ago," Marcus corrected. "But look at the recent activity. The big withdrawals. The ones accelerating in the last 2 months. They are funneling into a purchase agreement for a property in Sarasota." I looked at the address on the document. 12 Pelican Way, Sarasota, Florida. I pulled out my phone and typed the address into a real estate app. The listing popped up. It was a sprawling, Mediterranean-style villa with a private dock and a pool that looked out over the Gulf. It was listed for $1.2 million. The status was marked pending. "It is a retirement home," I realized, my voice cold. "It gets better," Marcus said. "I cross-referenced the flight logs for your father's credit card. The personal one, not the trust. He and your mother have flown to Sarasota 3 times in the last 4 months. They stayed at the Ritz-Carlton, which is 2 miles from this house." I stared at the photo of the villa. It had white pillars and a clay roof. It looked exactly like the dream board my mother had kept on her Pinterest account for years. The pieces slammed together in my mind. There was no resort. There was no expansion of the family business. The project was a lie. The consulting fees to Sterling were the price of admission to set up the structure. My father and mother were draining the family trust, the money meant for future generations, for education, for emergencies, to buy themselves a luxury retirement mansion in Florida before the family money ran out completely. They were cashing out. And Logan? "Did Logan send money to this title company?" I asked. "No," Marcus said. "The $300,000 he got was likely his cut. Keep quiet money. Or maybe he thinks he is investing in the resort. And they are playing him too. But the bulk of the trust funds, the Series B liquidation, that is going to Sarasota." I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of pure, crystallized anger. They were billing me $75,000 to cover their tracks. They were threatening my career, my livelihood, just so they could sip martinis by a pool in Florida while the rest of us were left with a hollowed-out legacy. "Can we prove it is fraud?" I asked Marcus. "If you sign that release," Marcus warned, pointing a pen at me, You are validating the previous transactions. You are retroactively approving the business expenses of the trust. If you sign, it becomes very hard to call it theft. It becomes bad investment strategy, which isn't a crime. I know, I said. That is why they are so desperate for the signature. The bank probably flagged the Sarasota purchase. They can't close on the Florida house until the source of funds is cleared. The Series B trust requires beneficiary sign-off for real estate liquidation. So, what is the play? Marcus asked. You take this to the police now? No, I said, standing up. If I go to the police now, they will lawyer up. Sterling will vanish. The money will be moved offshore before a warrant is even signed. I need to catch them in the act. I need them to admit it. You are going to the meeting, Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. I am going to the meeting, I agreed, and I need you to prepare an affidavit. Certify the flow of funds to the Florida Title Company. Certify the conflict of interest with Sterling's LLC. Have it ready by tomorrow morning. I drove home with a sense of grim purpose. That evening, I prepared my theater. I went into my closet and picked out an outfit that was professional but slightly softer than my usual armor. I wore a gray cardigan instead of a sharp blazer. I wore flats instead of heels. I applied less makeup, letting the dark circles under my eyes show. I wanted to look tired. I wanted to look beaten. I practiced my demeanor in the mirror. Shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. The perfect image of a daughter who had been crushed by the weight of family obligation. My phone buzzed again. It was my mother. We are so glad you are being sensible. Riley, we can put all this ugliness behind us. Just bring the checkbook. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I sat at my desk and opened the document I had drafted the night before. It was a formal request for an audit, addressed to the State Attorney General and the bank's Internal Fraud Division. It was fully cited, with appendices referencing the evidence Marcus had just confirmed. I didn't send it, not yet. I printed one copy. I folded it carefully and placed it in a plain manila folder. Then, I printed a second document. This one was a dummy check, filled out for $75,000, signed with a shaky hand. I put that in my purse. They wanted a performance? I would give them one. I went to bed early, sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of a soldier the night before a battle. I knew exactly what was going to happen in Henderson's office. They would be smug. They would offer me coffee. They would have the papers laid out with little sticky flags showing me where to sign. They would think they were closing a real estate deal. They didn't know they were attending their own arraignment. The next morning, I drove to Briar Glen. I pulled into the parking lot of the law firm at 155. I saw my father's car, a leased Mercedes, parked next to Logan's truck. They were already inside. I took a deep breath, checked the manila folder in my bag, and stepped out into the cold air. Showtime, I whispered. I walked into the building, my head bowed, looking for all the world like a woman who had lost everything. But inside, I was counting down the minutes until I took it all back. The conference room at Henderson's law office smelled of lemon polish and desperation. It was a windowless box lined with fake leather books that I doubted anyone had opened since the Reagan administration. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had handled everything from my grandfather's probate to my brother's DUI when he was 20, sat at the head of the table. He looked sweaty. His comb-over was plastered to his scalp, and he kept dabbing his upper lip with a handkerchief that had seen better days. My parents sat on one side, looking like they were dressed for church, stiff, pious, and judgmental. Logan was next to them, tapping his foot so frantically the entire table was vibrating. I sat alone on the other side. "So," Henderson said, his voice cracking slightly, "we are all here. Excellent. Riley, thank you for coming." He slid a stack of documents toward me. It was thick, maybe 50 pages, bound with a heavy staple. "This is the settlement agreement regarding the restructuring of the Simpson Family Trust," Henderson explained, avoiding my eyes. "It incorporates the repayment of the $75,000 via the check you brought, and in exchange, releases you from any future claims. Standard language." "Standard," my father echoed, nodding solemnly. "We just want this done. Riley, we want to move forward. I reached into my bag. My mother leaned forward, her eyes hungry, expecting me to pull out the checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a pair of reading glasses I didn't actually need and a red pen. I'm going to read it, I said softly. Read it? Logan snapped. It's 50 pages. Rye, we have a schedule. Just read the summary and sign the back. I never sign anything I haven't read. Logan, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act of the scared, hesitant daughter. Especially when it involves so much money, I want to make sure I am doing the right thing for the family. Of course, dear, my mother said, kicking Logan under the table. Take your time, but not too much time. We have a dinner reservation. I opened the first page. I began to read. I didn't skim. I moved my finger under every single line, moving my lips slightly as if sounding out the big words. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence in the room grew heavy and toxic. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could hear my father's heavy breathing. I could hear Logan texting furiously under the table. Page 4, I murmured to myself, turning the page slowly. For God's sake, Logan hissed. Henderson, can't you just summarize it for her? I am afraid she has the right to review. Logan, Henderson muttered, looking miserable. I was actually speed reading, scanning for the keywords Marcus and I had discussed. Most of it was indeed boilerplate fluff, definitions of terms, jurisdiction clauses, but on page 32, buried in a section titled Article 7, Indemnification and Assumption of Liability, I found the landmine. The beneficiary, Riley Simpson, hereby acknowledges that all prior disbursements, withdrawals, and allocations of assets from the Series B Trust made prior to this date are ratified and approved. The beneficiary assumes full joint and several liability for any tax implications, audits, or legal challenges arising from said historical transactions. It was beautiful in its malice. They weren't just asking me to waive my right to the money, they were asking me to retroactively bless their theft. If I signed this, and the IRS came asking about the $300,000 funneled to the Florida Title Company via a shell LLC, I would be legally on the hook for it. I would be agreeing that I knew about it and approved it. I suppressed a smile. It was so greedy it was almost impressive. The door to the conference room opened. A man walked in. He didn't knock. He didn't apologize. He just strode in with the energy of a man who owned the building. It was Mr. Gray, or rather, Julian Sterling. He was wearing a navy suit that cost more than Henderson's car. He carried a leather portfolio and projected an aura of slick, predatory competence. Sorry I am late, he said, his voice a smooth baritone. He looked at the scene, my family tense and sweating, me reading page 32, and smiled. It was a shark smile. Ah, Julian, my father said, perking up. Riley, this is Julian Sterling. He is the consultant, helping us with the transition. Pleasure, Sterling said, barely glancing at me. He pulled out a chair and sat down next to Henderson, effectively taking command of the room. Where are we? She is reading, Logan groaned. She has been on page 4 for an hour. It has been 20 minutes, Logan, I said meekly. Sterling turned to me. His eyes were cold, assessing. He saw a woman in a cardigan with bad posture and reading glasses. He saw a victim. He didn't see the compliance officer who had taken down a rogue trader in Chicago 3 years ago. Miss Simpson, Sterling said, his tone dripping with condescension. I understand your caution, but time is of the essence. We have the wire transfers queued for the acquisition. The title company is waiting on the final release code. Your signature is the literal key that turns the engine on. My ears pricked up. Wire transfers queued. Title company waiting. He was impatient. He was getting sloppy. I just don't understand this part, I said, pointing to the indemnity clause on page 32. It says I am responsible for historical transactions. What transactions? I thought the trust was just sitting there. Sterling didn't even blink. Standard legalese, Riley. It just means you accept the trust as it is today. Market fluctuations, management fees, that sort of thing. It protects the trustees, your parents, from being sued for not making enough profit in the past. Oh, I said. So it's just about market fluctuations? Exactly, Sterling said. Look, we are all on the same team here. Your parents are being incredibly generous allowing you to settle this debt for such a low figure. The audit risk alone. He trailed off, realizing he had used a scary word. Audit risk? I asked, my voice trembling. Hypothetical risk, Sterling corrected quickly. But if you don't sign today, the bank freezes the assets. The opportunity is lost. Your brother loses his funding. Your parents lose their retirement security. And you will be facing a very unpleasant legal battle. So I am the last one? I asked, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Everyone else has signed? Yes, Sterling said, checking his watch. Your parents signed the trustee dissolution papers this morning. Logan signed his waiver an hour ago. You are the final piece of the puzzle. Riley, once you sign, the Series B is dissolved. The funds move to the new LLC, and everyone is happy. I looked at Logan. He was nodding vigorously. I looked at my parents. They were watching me with a mixture of hope and contempt. I looked at the document. They had admitted it. I was the linchpin. Without my signature, they couldn't dissolve the trust. Without dissolving the trust, they couldn't move the deed to the Florida house. And if they couldn't move the deed, they couldn't close the sale. They were stuck, and they were terrified. I closed the document. I took off my reading glasses. I placed the red pen on the table. I can't sign this, I said. The room went dead silent. What? Logan whispered. I can't sign it, I repeated, my voice stronger this time, losing a bit of the wobble. This clause, Article 7, it feels wrong. If I sign this, I am saying I approve of everything you have done with the money, and I don't know what you have done. We haven't done anything, my father shouted, standing up. It is just sitting there. Then why do you need me to indemnify you? I asked calmly. Sterling leaned forward. The charm was evaporating, revealing the steel beneath. Riley, you are making a mistake, a very expensive mistake. If you walk out of here without signing, the deal collapses. Your family loses millions in potential revenue. Do you want to be the reason your brother fails? I don't want to be the reason I go to jail for fraud. Mr. Sterling, I said. Sterling froze. His eyes narrowed. He looked at me again. Really looked at me. He saw the shift in my posture. The slump was gone. The fear was gone. Fraud is a strong word, Sterling said softly. It is, I agreed. So is money laundering. So is embezzlement. Riley, my mother shrieked. How dare you speak to us like that? I am just reading the document, Mom, I said, tapping the paper. It says I assume liability. I don't want liability for your consultant's strategies. I stood up. Sit down, Logan barked. No, I said. I picked up my bag. I need to have my own lawyer look at this, not Mr. Henderson. We don't have time for that, Henderson squeaked. The deadline is 5 o'clock today. That sounds like a you problem, I said. Sterling stood up slowly. He was tall, looming over the table. He decided to try intimidation one last time. If you leave with that unsigned document, Sterling said, his voice low and menacing, I cannot protect you from the consequences. Your parents will file the suit. You will be served at your office. Hawthorne and Slate will know everything by Monday morning. He thought he was dropping a bomb. He didn't know he was lighting a fuse I had already waterproofed. Do what you have to do, I said. I looked at my father. He looked pale, almost gray. He knew. Deep down, he knew that if I walked out, the house of cards was going to wobble. But he was too deep in Sterling's pocket to stop it. Riley, please, my father said, his voice losing its bluster. Just sign the damn paper. I love you, Dad, I said. That is why I am not letting you drag me into prison with you. I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back, but I could feel Sterling's eyes boring into my skull. He wasn't scared yet. He was just annoyed. He thought I was a stubborn girl who needed to be squeezed a little harder. He had no idea that I wasn't just walking away. I was walking toward the nearest FedEx box to mail a copy of that unsigned agreement, specifically page 32, to Marcus. As I closed the door, I heard Logan slam his fist onto the table. "She is bluffing," Logan yelled. "She is broke. She'll come back." I smiled as I walked down the hallway. "Not this time, brother," I whispered. "Not this time." On Saturday morning, while my family likely nursed hangovers and drafted angry emails, I was sitting in the office of Sarah Vance, a trust litigation attorney in Cleveland, whom I had retained at 8 o'clock that morning. Sarah was everything Mr. Henderson was not: sharp, unsentimental, and terrifyingly expensive. I laid the evidence out on her glass conference table: the screenshot of the text message from my mother threatening legal action, the audio file of Logan admitting the plan to liquidate the real estate, and most importantly, the unsigned settlement agreement Henderson had tried to force me to sign, specifically the indemnification clause on page 32. Next to it, I placed the printout of Grandma Evelyn's original trust charter from the USB drive. Sarah put on her glasses and read in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system and the turning of pages. "This is aggressive," Sarah said finally, tapping the settlement document. "They are trying to get you to waive rights to assets that haven't been properly valued. But this," she moved her hand to Grandma's charter, "this is the kill switch. Article 9, Section 4, I cited from memory. The Duress and Coercion Protocol," Sarah read aloud. "If any beneficiary is threatened with disinheritance, litigation, or social harm in exchange for waiving their rights, the trust administrator is automatically stripped of authority, and the trust enters a suspended state pending a third-party audit." She looked up at me and smiled. "Your grandmother was a paranoid genius." "She knew my father," I said. "Riley, we don't need to file a lawsuit," Sarah explained, leaning back. "Lawsuits are public. They take years. If we file a suit, your parents will fight it. Sterling will drain the accounts before we get a judgment, and the money will be in the Cayman Islands. We need to stop the bleeding today." "So we trigger the clause," I said. "We trigger the clause," she agreed. "I will draft a notice of breach and deliver it to the bank's legal department immediately. We attach the text messages and the audio transcript as proof of the coercive attempt. Once the bank sees this, they are legally required to freeze the assets to protect their own liability. They won't release a dime to your father, your brother, or this Sterling character until the audit is complete." "Do it," I said. Sarah drafted the letter while I watched. It was a thing of beauty, cold, precise, and devoid of emotion. It didn't ask for permission. It cited the specific statutes and the specific lines in the trust charter that mandated the freeze. We sent it via secure courier to the bank's headquarters in Columbus at noon. By Monday morning, the bomb went off. I was at my desk at Hawthorne and Slate, working on a routine compliance check, when my phone started vibrating. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail. Then Logan called. Twice, 3 times. Then Henderson called. I turned my phone over and went back to work. At 10:30, I received an automated alert from the bank's portal, the one I still had access to via Grandma's credentials. Alert: account status change. T99 lockout. Initiated. All outbound wire transfers suspended. I felt a grim satisfaction. The $300,000 they had already stolen was gone, but the remaining $400,000 and, crucially, the deed to the lakeside property were now locked in a vault that my father didn't have the combination to. The voicemail from my father was a masterclass in panic. "Riley, what have you done? The bank just declined the wire for the deposit. The title company in Florida is threatening to walk away. You have killed the deal. Call me back right now." He didn't sound like a patriarch anymore. He sounded like a man who had just realized the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. Logan's texts were less coherent. He called me names I won't repeat. He threatened to come to my office. He threatened to tell everyone I was mentally unstable. I saved every single message. I forwarded them to Sarah. Every threat they made just added another layer of concrete to the wall I was building around the money. By Tuesday, the silence from the family was deafening. They had realized that screaming wasn't working. They had realized that I held the remote control to their entire future. That was when the real player entered the game. On Wednesday afternoon, my direct line at work rang, not my cell phone, my office desk phone, a number that wasn't public. "Riley Simpson," I answered professionally. "Ms. Simpson, this is Julian Sterling." His voice was calm, devoid of the panic that had infected my family. He sounded like he was calling to schedule a tea time. "Mr. Sterling," I said, leaning back in my chair, "I am surprised you got this number." "I am a resourceful man. Riley. Can I call you Riley? I feel we got off on the wrong foot on Friday." "I think we understood each other perfectly," I said. "You wanted me to sign a fraudulent waiver, and I declined." "Fraudulent is such a harsh term," he chuckled. "Let's call it creative restructuring. Look, I admire what you did. Truly. Freezing the account? Using the old lady's obscure trust clause? That was a power move. I respect power moves. Your father? Well, he is a blunt instrument. But you? You are surgical. Is there a point to this call, Mr. Sterling?" "The point is, the freeze serves nobody," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The money sits there, earning zero interest. The Florida deal dies. Your parents lose their retirement dream. And you get, what? A sense of moral superiority? That doesn't pay the mortgage." "I don't have a mortgage," I said. "I live within my means." "Everyone has a price. Riley," he said smoothly. "I have analyzed the trust. There is enough meat on the bone for everyone. Suppose we restructure the deal. We cut Logan's share in half. He is an idiot anyway. He will just blow it. We redirect $150,000 to you, cash, under the table, or through a consulting contract if you prefer to keep it clean for tax purposes. You lift the freeze. We close the deal. And you walk away with 6 figures." He was trying to bribe me with my own money. It was insulting, but I kept my voice steady. I needed him to think I was considering it. I needed to get him into a room where he couldn't hide behind a phone line. $150,000, I repeated slowly. $200,000, he countered immediately. "That is my final offer. $200,000 for a signature. That is 10 years of savings for a girl in your position." "My position," I echoed, letting a hint of greed seep into my voice. "It is tempting. My car is getting old." "Exactly," he said, hearing the crack in the armor he was looking for. "Why protect a legacy that doesn't care about you? Take the money. Let your parents have their tacky Florida house. Let Logan have his delusions. You and I, we are the smart ones. We cash out." "I need guarantees," I said. "I am not signing anything based on a phone call. I need to see the new distribution plan in writing. And I want everyone there. My parents, Logan, you. I want it done formally." "Of course," Sterling said, his relief audible. "A formal board meeting. We can do it at your parents' house. Friday night? We can treat it like a closing dinner." "Friday night works," I said. 7 o'clock? "Excellent. I will have the papers drawn up. $200,000. Straight to you. Smart girl?" He hung up. I sat there for a moment, listening to the dial tone. "Smart girl," I whispered, mimicking his condescending tone. I hung up the phone and immediately called Sarah. "He took the bait," I said. "Friday night, 7 o'clock. The whole cast will be there." "Are you ready?" Sarah asked. "Once we walk into that room, there is no going back. We are dropping the hammer." "I am ready," I said. "But Sarah, I need one more thing. I need the full audit report from Marcus, the one that links Sterling's previous failed funds to the shell company my father signed for. I want the history of every dollar he has stolen from other families." "Marcus finished it this morning," Sarah said. "It is 40 pages of pure arson. Sterling has done this in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, he finds asset-rich, cash-poor families, promises them development deals, drains their trusts via fees, and then bankrupts the project. He is a vampire. Riley. Good, I said, because I am bringing a steak. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I didn't sleep much. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when the storm is finally breaking. My family thought I was coming to surrender. Sterling thought I was coming to sell out. They were all preparing for a negotiation. I was preparing for an execution. On Friday evening, I dressed carefully. No cardigans this time. I wore my sharpest black suit. I wore the heels that made me 2 inches taller. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I met Sarah and Marcus in the driveway of my parents' estate at 6:55. It was raining. A cold, miserable November rain that slicked the cobblestones. "You have the check?" I asked Sarah. "I have the check," she nodded, patting her briefcase. It wasn't the check they were expecting. "You have the files?" I asked Marcus. "Digital and hard copy," Marcus said, his face grim. "Let's go," I said. We walked up to the double oak doors, the same doors I had walked out of on Thanksgiving night. That felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, I was a victim running away from a bill. Tonight, I was the one bringing the invoice. I didn't knock. I still had my key. I unlocked the door and threw it open. The warmth hit me again. The same smell of sage and expensive perfume. They were waiting in the dining room, seated around the mahogany table just like before. My parents, Logan, and Sterling. There was a bottle of champagne on ice, ready to celebrate their victory over the wayward daughter. When I walked in, flanked by a litigation attorney and a forensic accountant, the smiles dropped from their faces like wax melting in a fire. Sterling stood up, his eyes darting to Sarah, then to Marcus. He recognized the look of professional danger. "Riley," my father said, standing up uncertainly. "Who are these people? We said a family meeting." "It is a family meeting," I said, walking to the head of the table. I didn't sit down. I stood there, gripping the back of the chair my father usually sat in. "But since you brought your consultant, I brought mine." "This is highly irregular," Sterling said, his voice tight. "We had a deal. Riley, 200,000. "We didn't have a deal, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. "We had an entrapment." I nodded to Sarah. She opened her briefcase and slammed a thick stack of documents onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This," I announced, "is the audit you were so afraid of. And tonight, we aren't negotiating a payout. We are negotiating your surrender." The trap was closed, the lock was turned, and for the first time in my life, I watched my brother look at me with genuine fear. To understand why I walked into my parents' dining room on Friday night with a forensic accountant instead of a settlement check, you have to understand the 48 hours of hell that preceded it. I had assumed that after the bank freeze and the phone call with Sterling, they would sit quietly and wait for the negotiation. I thought I had cornered them into a respectful silence. I was wrong. I had underestimated just how dirty Julian Sterling played when he realized his charm offensive had failed. It started on Thursday morning, less than 12 hours after I agreed to the meeting. I woke up to a phone that was vibrating so intensely it was sliding across my nightstand. I had 37 notifications. They weren't texts from my family, they were tags. I opened social media. My stomach dropped, not with fear, but with the cold, heavy realization that the war had moved from private legal documents to the public square. A post had been circulated on the Briar Glen Community Voice page, a private group with over 5,000 members, including every neighbor, country club member, and business owner in my hometown. The headline read, "Heartbreaking, local family devastated by financial elder abuse." Below it was a picture. It was a picture of the check, the $75,000 check I had refused to sign, but it had been digitally altered. The trust account information was blurred out. The date was cropped. All that remained was my name on the Pay To line, which they had faked, reversing the flow of funds in the narrative, and the memo line, family repayment. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. It is sad when children turn on the parents who sacrificed everything for them. Richard and Eleanor Simpson are facing a crisis after their estranged daughter, Riley Simpson, refused to honor a personal loan used for her education and is now using legal loopholes to freeze her elderly parents' retirement assets. Shame on you, Riley. Briar Glen expects better. It didn't stop there. By 10 o'clock in the morning, an anonymous email had been sent to the General Ethics tip line at Hawthorne and Slate. I knew this because the head of HR, a woman I had eaten lunch with for 3 years, walked into my office with a printed copy, looking pale. "Riley," she said, closing the door. "We got this. It claims you are under investigation for misappropriating family trust funds and that you are using company resources to harass your parents." I took the paper from her. My hand didn't shake. I read the accusations. They were vague enough to avoid libel laws, but specific enough to trigger an internal review. "Is this true?" she asked. "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "It is a retaliatory strike because I blocked a fraudulent transfer of assets yesterday. Here is the case number for the bank inquiry I filed." I handed her the reference number from Sarah Vance. "If you need to suspend me pending investigation, I understand, but I suggest you wait until Monday." She looked at me, saw the steel in my spine, and nodded. "I will hold the file until Monday. But Riley, fix this." "I intend to," I said. I went back to my desk. I didn't cry. I didn't call my mother to scream. That is what they wanted. They wanted me to be emotional. They wanted me to be the crazy daughter defending herself in the comment section of a Facebook post. Instead, I went hunting. I opened my laptop and pulled up the tracking tools I used for corporate due diligence. I looked at the Facebook post. It had been posted by a user named Concerned Neighbor, a profile created 3 days ago with a stock photo of a golden retriever. I analyzed the syntax of the post. It used specific phrases: legal loopholes, asset freezing, fiduciary duty. These weren't the words of a gossiping neighbor. These were the words of someone who knew the legal mechanics of what I had done to the trust. I ran a trace on the digital footprint of the image. The metadata had been scrubbed, but the upload path told a story. The image had been hosted on a temporary server before being pushed to social media to mask the IP address. But they had made a mistake, a lazy, arrogant mistake. The anonymous email sent to my HR department hadn't been routed through a VPN. It had been sent from a generic Gmail account, but the sender had logged in via a dedicated mail server client. I traced the header of the email. It resolved to a static IP address in Columbus, Ohio. I cross-referenced the IP address with the domain registry I had pulled earlier in the week for Omni Strategy Partners. It was a match. The smear campaign wasn't coming from my mother's iPad. It was coming from Julian Sterling's office server. He was sitting in his high-rise, orchestrating the destruction of my reputation, probably billing my father an hourly rate for public relations management. At noon, Logan texted me. "Everyone sees who you really are now. Just sign the deal tomorrow. Take the $200,000, and maybe Dad will post a retraction, or keep fighting and lose your job. Your choice." They were gloating. They thought they had won. They thought that by shaming me publicly, they had broken my will. They interpreted my silence as defeat. They didn't understand that I wasn't silent because I was hiding. I was silent because I was reloading. I spent the rest of Thursday capturing everything. I took screenshots of the comments. I saved the server logs linking Sterling to the email. I documented the timeline of the harassment. I printed it all out and added it to the folder Sarah Vance was holding. By Thursday evening, the storm online was raging. People I went to high school with were commenting "wow" and "so disappointed." My cousins were posting vague status updates about loyalty. I sat in my apartment, drinking a cup of chamomile tea. The world outside was noisy, but inside my head, it was dead quiet. I looked at the folder. It was thick now. It contained the evidence of embezzlement, the recording of the blackmail, the proof of the shell company, and now, the proof of cyber harassment and defamation. Sterling had overplayed his hand. If he had just stuck to the financial fraud, he might have been able to negotiate a plea deal. But by attacking my professional license and my reputation, he had made this personal. He had given me the ammunition to not just sue him, but to destroy his standing with every other client he had. I turned off my phone. I didn't need to see any more notifications. I went to bed at 10 o'clock. Usually, the night before a confrontation, I would be a wreck. I would be rehearsing arguments, worrying about what my father would shout, worrying if my mother would cry. But that night, I slept for 8 solid hours. I slept well because I wasn't confused anymore. For years, I had wondered if I was the bad guy. I had wondered if I really was ungrateful, if I really was the problem. The last 48 hours had clarified everything. They didn't love me. They didn't even respect me. I was just an obstacle to their lifestyle, a signature they needed to harvest to buy a villa in Florida. And Julian Sterling? He was just a bully in a tailored suit who thought he could crush a woman because he had a server farm and a law degree. I woke up on Friday morning feeling refreshed. I did my yoga. I drank my coffee. I put on my armor, the black suit, the heels. When I drove to meet Sarah and Marcus that evening, the rain was hammering against the windshield, washing away the dirt of the last 2 days. I pulled up to the house. I saw the lights on in the dining room. I imagined them inside, opening the champagne, laughing about how they had scared me into submission. They were probably writing the retraction post already, ready to post it the moment I signed, framing it as their gracious forgiveness. I turned off the ignition. "Ready?" Sarah asked from the passenger seat. "Oh, I am more than ready," I said. I wasn't walking in there to defend myself against their lies. I was walking in there to show them the truth. And the truth was a sledgehammer I had spent 5 days forging. I stepped out into the rain, not as the daughter who wanted to be loved, but as the prosecutor who was about to deliver the closing argument of her life. The silence in the dining room was not the quiet of peace. It was the vacuum before a thunderclap. My mother was the first to break it, her hand fluttering to her pearl necklace as she looked from Sarah to Marcus. "Riley," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation, "we invited you here to make peace, to welcome you back, and you bring strangers into our home?" "These are not strangers, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "This is Sarah Vance, a specialist in trust litigation, and Marcus Thorne, a forensic accountant, and since Mr. Sterling is here representing your financial interests, I thought it only fair that I have someone represent the truth." Logan slammed his champagne glass down on the table. The crystal stem snapped, sending a spray of expensive liquid onto the tablecloth, but nobody moved to clean it up. "This is ridiculous," Logan shouted, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "You are ruining everything. We have a deal on the table, a deal that gets you paid. And you come in here playing detective? You are just jealous. Riley, you have always been jealous that I am the one taking the family forward while you rot in a cubicle." He stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I am the victim here. I have been working on this development for 2 years. I put my reputation on the line. And now you are holding my capital hostage because of some childhood grudge?" "Sit down." "Logan," I said, "it wasn't a request. It was a command." "Don't tell me to—" "I said sit down," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "Unless you want to hear what I have to say from the other side of a jail cell." Logan froze. He looked at Sterling for support, but Sterling was no longer looking at him. Sterling was staring at Marcus, who had silently opened his laptop and connected it to a portable projector he had placed on the sideboard. A beam of light cut through the dim room, hitting the pale yellow wall above the fireplace. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah Vance said, her tone pleasant but sharp as a scalpel. "Before we proceed, I need to verify your credentials. You are acting as a fiduciary advisor for the Simpson Family Trust, correct?" "I am a strategic consultant," Sterling said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks. "I advise on asset allocation. I do not manage funds directly." "Interesting," Sarah noted, "because under Ohio law, anyone directing the liquidation of trust assets for specific investment vehicles Requires a securities license. Do you have one? My legal team handles the compliance. Sterling deflected, his eyes narrowing. This is a private meeting. Anything discussed here is privileged. Not when it concerns the commission of a felony, Sarah replied. Marcus, if you please. Marcus hit a key. The projection on the wall wasn't a chart. It was a scanned copy of a bank statement. This, I began, walking toward the projection, is the transaction history of the Simpson Legacy Trust 2, Series B, the trust Grandma Evelyn set up to ensure her grandchildren could get educated or survive a crisis. I pointed to a line item dated 18 months ago. $5,000, I read. Paid to Omni Strategy Partners, LLC, consulting retainer. I pointed to the next line. $10,000, 3 months later, advisory fee. I scrolled down, the numbers blurring into a cascade of theft. $15,000, project management, $12,000, legal review. It adds up. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice dry and factual. Over the last 20 months, Omni Strategy Partners has billed the trust for a total of $540,000 in fees alone. That is before the capital withdrawal. My father let out a small, strangled sound. He looked at the screen, then at Sterling. Julian, you said those were standard setup costs. You said it was complicated. It is complicated, Richard, Sterling snapped, his composure slipping. You want high returns? You have to pay for the expertise. Expertise? I laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. Let's look at what that expertise bought us. Marcus changed the slide. Now, the screen showed the Secretary of State filings I had uncovered, placed side by side with a real estate contract. $300,000, I said, pointing to the withdrawal made just days before Thanksgiving. This is the money you gave Logan, or rather, the money you told Logan was for his business. I looked at my brother. Logan, did you ever see that money in your account? It is in the LLC, Logan stammered, looking confused. Julian said it had to stay in the operating account for tax reasons, but it is mine. It is for the cabins. It is not in the LLC, I corrected him. Marcus, show them. The next slide appeared, a wire transfer confirmation. The $300,000 went from the trust through Omni Strategy Partners and was immediately wired to a title company in Sarasota, Florida, I explained. It was a deposit, not for a resort, not for cabins. Marcus clicked again. A photo of the Mediterranean villa appeared on the wall, glowing like a mirage. 12 Pelican Way, I said. A retirement villa. Listing price $1.2 million. The room went dead silent. Logan looked at the photo. Then he looked at our parents. Mom, Logan whispered. That is the house you liked on vacation last year. My mother burst into tears. It was a theatrical, sobbing display, burying her face in her hands. We deserve it. We worked our whole lives. We just wanted to be comfortable. The cold up here hurts your father's joints. So you stole from us? Logan asked, his voice cracking. You told me I was a businessman. You told me I was a developer, but you were just using my share to buy yourself a pool? It is an investment, my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The property value will go up. We were going to leave it to you when we die. It is all the same money. It is not the same money, Sarah Vance interjected, because you are not buying it in your names. You are buying it in the name of the LLC. And who owns the LLC? Marcus brought up the final document, the operating agreement for Omni Strategy Partners. Authorized signer, Richard Simpson, Marcus read. But look at the ownership structure. The LLC is owned 90% by a holding company in Delaware. And that holding company? Marcus clicked one last time. A document from the Delaware Registry appeared. It was heavily redacted, but Marcus had done his job. He had pierced the corporate veil. The holding company is controlled by Julian Sterling, I said. My father's face went white. He turned slowly to look at the man sitting next to him. Julian, my father croaked. You said the LLC was mine. You said you were just the manager. Sterling didn't look at my father. He looked at me. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked like a wolf that had been cornered by a rabbit and couldn't quite understand the physics of it. "This is a draft," Sterling said, waving a dismissive hand. "The final paperwork transfers ownership to the family upon closing. That was the agreement." Riley is twisting the facts to suit her narrative. "Is that so?" Sarah asked. "Because we pulled the court records from Cleveland, the estate of Margaret Vane. You used the exact same structure. Mr. Sterling, you convinced a widow to move her assets into an LLC you controlled, promised her a development deal, and when the project failed due to market conditions, you walked away with the assets because the holding company had senior creditor status." Sarah leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "You aren't a consultant. You are a predator. You find families with a little bit of money and a lot of greed, and you bleed them dry while telling them they are smart." Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "I think this meeting is over. Richard, Eleanor, if you want to salvage this deal, call me when your daughter leaves. Riley, you have made some very serious accusations tonight. My lawyers will be in touch regarding defamation." "No, they won't," I said. Sterling paused at the door. "Excuse me?" "You aren't going to sue me," I said. "Because if you do, I will have to depose you. And if I depose you, I will ask you about the email server in your office that sent the anonymous tip to my employer yesterday." Sterling froze. His hand hovered over the doorknob. "I traced the IP," I said softly. "I know it was you. You tried to get me fired to pressure me into signing. That is tortious interference, Mr. Sterling. But more importantly, it proves intent. It proves you knew the transaction was illegitimate, which is why you had to resort to coercion." He turned back to face me. The mask of the sophisticated businessman fell away completely. His face was twisted with genuine malice. "You are a very annoying little girl," he hissed. "And you are a thief," I replied. "Get out!" my father screamed. But he wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling at Sterling. "Get out of my house!" "I am leaving," Sterling sneered. "But good luck getting your money back. The consulting fees are non-refundable. Read your contract. Richard, I got paid for services rendered. The $300,000? That is a non-refundable deposit to the seller. You break the deal, you lose the cash." He looked at me one last time. "You didn't save them, Riley. You just ensured they are broke." Sterling walked out the door, the heavy oak slamming shut behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother was sobbing quietly. My father was staring at the wall where the projection of his failure still glowed. Logan was the one who broke. He slumped into his chair, putting his head in his hands. $300,000. Gone. It is all gone. "It is not gone," Sarah said, closing her folder, "because Riley triggered the freeze." My father looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "The freeze? You mean the bank stopped the wire?" "The bank stopped the balance," I explained. "The $400,000 remaining in the Series B is safe. Sterling couldn't touch it because I wouldn't sign. But the $300,000 you already sent? The deposit for the house?" I looked at my parents. I saw them for what they were. Small, greedy people who had been outsmarted by a bigger shark. They looked at me, waiting for me to tell them I had a magic wand, that I had fixed their mistake. "Is it safe?" my mother asked, wiping her eyes. "Can we get it back?" "The audit is official now," I said. "The bank has flagged the entire account for fraud review. Omni Strategy Partners is listed as a suspicious vendor." "So we get the money back?" Logan asked, looking like a child. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "We have frozen the mechanism of the theft," I said. "Sterling cannot take another dime, and because we caught the LLC structure, Sarah can petition to claw back the fees he charged." My father let out a long, shuddering breath. "Thank God. Thank God. Riley, we didn't know. He was so convincing." "He played us," Logan muttered. "He played all of us." "We can fix this," my mother said, standing up and reaching for my hand. "We can just undo the trust changes. We will keep the money in the family. We are safe now, thanks to Riley. She smiled at me, a weak, tentative smile that tried to erase 5 years of neglect and 3 days of blackmail. We are a family, she said. We stick together. I looked at her hand, then I looked at the projection on the wall. The image of the Florida villa they were willing to sell my future to buy. They thought it was over. They thought I had swooped in, killed the dragon, and was now going to hand the gold back to the villagers. They thought the revenge part of the story was me defeating Sterling. They were wrong. Saving the money from Sterling was just the cleanup. The revenge was about what happened to the money after it was saved. You are right, Mom, I said, pulling my hand away. The money is safe. The $300,000 deposit is frozen in escrow. Good, my father exhaled. Good. But there is one thing I haven't shown you, I said. I nodded to Marcus. One last slide, please. Marcus hit the key. The image of the Florida villa disappeared. In its place appeared a copy of a cashier's check, a check I had drawn up yesterday morning from my own personal savings, combined with a hard money loan I had secured against my own condo. It was a check made out to the same title company in Florida. For the exact amount of the deposit on 12 Pelican Way. My family stared at the screen, confusion wrinkling their brows. What is this? Logan asked. You see, I said, my voice soft and dangerous. When I investigated the property, I found something interesting. The purchase agreement Sterling had you sign, it had a time is of the essence clause. If the buyer, Omni Strategy Partners, failed to clear the funds by 5 o'clock today, the contract would void. So the deal is dead, my father said. We lost the house. Omni Strategy Partners lost the house, I corrected. But the seller, they were very motivated. They just wanted a buyer with verified funds. I placed my hands on the table and leaned in. The check you see on the screen? That is my check. I wired it this morning. It arrived at 2 o'clock. I don't understand, my mother whispered. I didn't just stop Sterling, I said. I stepped into his shoes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the one document I hadn't given to Sarah. I unfolded it and laid it on the table. I didn't buy the house for you, Mother, and I didn't save the trust fund for you, Father, and I certainly didn't do any of this to save your business, Logan. I looked at them, savoring the moment. The revenge isn't that I stopped the theft. The revenge is that I am the new owner of the debt. And then, I waited for the final shoe to drop, the one that would explain why the $300,000 they had already sent wasn't coming back to them, but was coming to me. The silence in the room was so profound, I could hear the rain lashing against the dining room windows, a rhythmic drumming that sounded like applause from the universe. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and a desperate, pathetic hope. She looked at the projection of the check, my check, and then at me. You bought the house? She stammered. Riley, I don't understand. You bought 12 Pelican Way? I did, I said, keeping my voice even. My LLC, Evelyn's Justice, is the new owner of record. The title company accepted my wire transfer at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The contract with Omni Strategy Partners is void. Julian Sterling doesn't own the property. You don't own the property. I do. But, my father frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to process the shift in power. But that is our retirement. That is where we are going to live. No, Richard, I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. That is where I own a rental asset, and judging by your current financial situation, you don't meet the income requirements for my tenants. Tenants? Logan stood up, his face blotchy. You can't do that. That is our house. We put $300,000 down on it. You put $300,000 into a shell company owned by a con artist, I corrected him. And because you signed a contract that Julian Sterling drafted, that money is currently sitting in a frozen account that the FBI is going to spend the next 2 years dissecting. You didn't buy a house, Logan. You bought a crime scene. Logan slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. So, my mother whispered, her hands shaking, we have nothing? The Series B trust is frozen. The deposit is gone. And the house is yours? That is a concise summary, yes, Sarah Vance noted from the corner, closing her briefcase with a satisfying click. Just then, my father's phone on the table began to buzz. It vibrated violently against the mahogany. The caller ID flashed, Julian Sterling. My father reached for it instinctively. Put it on speaker, I ordered. My father hesitated, looking at me with fear. Put it on speaker, Dad, I repeated. Unless you want to be an accessory after the fact. He tapped the button with a shaking finger. Richard! Sterling's voice filled the room. He sounded frantic. The smooth baritone gone, replaced by the jagged edge of panic. He must have realized Sarah Vance wasn't bluffing about the deposition. Richard, listen to me. Don't listen to your daughter. She is dangerous. We need to scrub the emails. Right now. Go to the server in the basement and delete the correspondence folder from August. If you do that, I can claim the fee structure was verbal. We can salvage the $300,000. Just tell me you will do it. The room went deadly silent. Sterling had just admitted it. He had just admitted the need to destroy evidence. He had just admitted the fee structure was a fabrication to be manipulated. Mr. Sterling. Sarah Vance spoke up, leaning toward the phone. This is Sarah Vance. I feel obligated to inform you that this call is being witnessed by a forensic accountant and legal counsel, and I believe the police are currently pulling into your driveway in Columbus. There was a strangled noise on the other end of the line. Then, the distinct sound of a siren wailing in the background, followed by a click. The line went dead. My father stared at the phone. The device looked like a bomb that had just detonated in his face. He told me to delete the evidence, my father whispered. He knew. He knew the whole time. He knew because he built the trap. Dad, I said. But you walked into it, and you dragged the whole family with you. I can fix this, my father mumbled, standing up unsteadily. I can testify. I can tell them I was a victim, Riley. You have to help us. You have the house. You have the control. Just let us stay there. Let us have this one thing. We are your parents. And I am the daughter you sent a bill to, I said. I reached into my purse. My hand brushed against the cold leather of my wallet until I found what I was looking for. I pulled out the envelope they had given me on Thanksgiving. The cream-colored envelope containing the check for $75,000. The check they had demanded I sign to repay them for my childhood. I walked around the table. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the room. I stopped in front of my father. I placed the envelope on the table in front of him. You said I owed you, I said softly. You said I was a debt to be collected. You wanted $75,000 to balance the books of your affection. I pointed to the projection on the wall, where the proof of my $1.2 million purchase still glowed. I just saved the $400,000 remaining in the trust from being stolen. I just exposed the man who was bleeding you dry. And I just bought the asset that secures the family legacy, even if that family doesn't include you anymore. I leaned in close, looking my father in the eyes. I saw the ruin there. I saw the realization that he was no longer the patriarch, but a foolish old man who had gambled everything and lost. I think my debt is paid, I said. Riley, please, my mother sobbed, reaching out to grab my sleeve. Don't leave us like this. Logan has nothing. We have nothing. We can't pay the legal fees for the audit. We need you. I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. You don't need me. Mom, you need a lawyer who isn't Henderson, and you need to learn how to live within your means. I hear the condos in Briar Glen are quite affordable. You are stealing our house, Logan shouted, tears streaming down his face. You are stealing my life. I am not stealing anything, Logan, I said, turning to my brother one last time. I am teaching you the most expensive business lesson of your life. Never sign a deal you haven't read, and never underestimate the person you think is weak. I looked at Sarah and Marcus. We are done here. We are, Sarah agreed. I will file the evidence with the district attorney in the morning. Richard, Eleanor, Do not leave the state. I turned and walked toward the door, the same door I had walked out of on Thanksgiving night. Back then, I had walked out feeling like a fugitive. Tonight, I was walking out as the landlord. "Riley," my father called out, his voice cracking. "Where are you going?" I paused with my hand on the brass handle. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see their faces to know they were broken. "I am going home," I said. "To my house, paid for with my money, and tomorrow, I am going to buy a very expensive bottle of wine and drink a toast to Grandma Evelyn." I opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of rain and wet earth. It smelled clean. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The latch clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I walked down the stone path to my car. The rain cooling my face. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, leaving the wreckage of the Simpson family in the rearview mirror. They had handed me a check to pay for my freedom. In the end, I bought it myself, and it was worth every single penny. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please comment below with your city or country so we can see how far Riley's story has traveled. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by more people. Your support means the world to us.